Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
We are in this Joshua 18 through 21 lesson, though we have looked at some of these chapters already. We're going to look mostly today at some more of the cities of refuge and the Levitical cities, along with some interesting questions about some big statements made here on the status of the conquest, which seems to contradict a little bit of what we see later on in Hebrews. That should be an interesting thing for us to discuss. But before we do that, I wanted to answer a question that came up last week. In particular, it was asked, did Israel ever control all of the land that was promised to them? And I answered last week, no, they did not. And it was brought up, well, Solomon expanded the kingdom quite a bit. And I don't have all the maps in my head quite as nicely as some people might. So I wanted to kind of get the maps for you to show you kind of the scope of the kingdoms. I know this is a little hard to see. I'm going to have some things come up on the screen that show a little bit more as well. You might remember this map from towards the beginning of our class. This is the scope of what was promised to the people. All of this kind of blue-green area is what was promised to Israel by God. This little purple area over here is additionally what they got because of those nations on the east of the Jordan who resisted Israel, and that was added as a result. This here is a map of how far Solomon was able to, and everywhere you see this red outline is how far he went out. This little dashed area up here is more economic control rather than really controlling that in a military sense. You'll notice these look pretty similar, but it's always hard to compare maps like this because they're not zoomed in the same, they're not cropped the same. It drives me crazy. So what I did was made a really janky map here for you. That shows basically the outline. This blue line that I drew is this blue outline, roughly. So this is what God promised to them, and the red line is what Solomon was actually able to expand to. So you'll notice in parts that Solomon actually went beyond what had been promised to Israel. He actually was able to expand the kingdom. Some of this area over here to the east is explained by this area, of course. That's where they were able to, get that land from those nations that stood up against them. But the real holdouts in Solomon's day are Philistia right here and Phoenicia right here. These two strips of land with people who are not controlled, they've not been subjugated. And those names come up a lot, particularly Philistia, in what kind of harm and damage they do to Israel long term. And it makes sense because they're just right here, very close to Jerusalem, very close to all of these other nations, all these other Israelite cities. To contrast that, the purple area here that I have drawn, this is the rough borders of what they're able to control by the end of the conquest in Joshua. And so you can see it's a smaller area than what was promised in this blue, and then smaller still than what Solomon's going to be able to control later. But it's still a pretty substantial area in general. That may be a little janky. I am no artist, and it's hard to draw the borders exactly. And also, some of the borders are just a little difficult, even with perfect artistic skill. Some of the borders are a little uncertain, and so we're not always totally sure if it curves down this way or if it goes a little farther before it curves down, some things like that. We're not 100% sure where all the cities were that are even mentioned in the Bible. But this should give you a rough idea of the scale involved, of how much land they were able to control here in Joshua, how much land they could have controlled if they had been faithful to God, and then how far Solomon was able to go beyond that. Is that clear as mud? You have questions about that, Gary?
This came up just between me. I hadn't talked to you or anything, but I mean, chapter 21, 43 through 45, just sounds like God gave them all the land that he promised them, and they took it and settled there.
We will get there. That's question 5. It's a really important question. This is a big thing we have to understand about the book of Joshua to know what God has done for them and what the people have done. But yes, very, very important question. I'm going to hold off on answering it until just a little bit later in class. Yeah. Any questions about this that you want to bring up? Does this make Kathy?
Did you already go over the refuge cities? I mean, the cities of refuge?
No, I'm going to go, and we went over that a little bit last week. I'm going to kind of go over that again some more. Oh, no, the cities of refuge, so I've got another map for you there, if we're going to do that. The cities of refuge, so that's found in chapter 20, and there were 6 of them. They were 6 of the Levitical cities, and I've kind of put these red dots here on where they were. So they're spread out throughout the nation of Israel to, for kind of some logistical sense. That if you have accidentally killed somebody and you're running for your life, running for justice, then you have some place to go to. So what is especially noteworthy here is that we have the Jordan River coming up this way. So you have 3 cities on the west side of the Jordan, 3 cities on the east side of the Jordan, so the river's not going to be the obstacle. And then they're kind of arranged north, central, south. North, central, south. That's just roughly sharing the responsibility of cities of refuge among different tribes, as well as geographically spreading them out so that there's one reasonably nearby no matter where you are. Is that what you were referring to, Kathy?
Yeah. And I just have one comment. I read that, I thought this was interesting, you probably don't, but if I was running to a city of refuge, it says that they were about 25 miles apart. So I have a map that shows one city of refuge, and then it has a big circle, which would be 25 miles. And it was just interesting to see how you could do that.
Yeah. Clearly, it makes sense for these to be spread out. And these are some, but not all, of the Levitical cities, and they're going to be spread out as well, though I didn't make a map of all 48 of those on there. You'd have a lot of little red dots all over the place. But there are 48 of those Levitical cities in total, including these 6. So it's not just one tribe that has to worry about the cities of refuge. It's not just one part of the nation that gets that form of justice. This is spread out. This is intended for the entire nation. Last week we talked about cities of refuge as an arm of God's mercy and justice. So one of the things we said last week was, if you have murdered somebody in a premeditated way, it's out of the hatred of your heart, then there's really nothing that can be done about that under God's law except for your blood to be required. There's no price that you can pay. There's no city that you can flee to. There's nothing that allows for there to be justice without your life ending. It's a very serious matter to take somebody's life. No matter what context we're talking about, it should always be a sobering thing when somebody dies. Even when somebody is executed as punishment for a crime, it's still a sobering thing. It's still extremely serious and never like this occasion for joy and for excitement. It's a very, very serious thing. But we also said last week that there are some cases where, what we would call today, negligent homicide or manslaughter, or these things where, yes, somebody has died, but I wasn't trying to do that. That wasn't my goal. That it was not premeditated. It was maybe not even intended. I wasn't intended at all. it's just my negligence or, my distraction or whatever the case may be has led to somebody dying. Again, that's not something we can just sweep under the rug. If I accidentally kill someone in your family, are we just going to kind of shrug and go, well, Danny, sometimes he does things like that? No, that's kind of too big of a deal to say that. It's too serious. It's too heavy of a consequence to just sweep under the rug. Yet it's also recognized to not be the same thing as murder, as premeditated murder. And so that's why these cities of refuge were established. They're places that the person can run to and can plead their case. Because the angry family member is going to want that person to die, is going to want to avenge their fallen family member, but there may be some other avenue of justice that is better, considering it was an accident. And remember, we saw from Numbers that there are some cases where it could be a capital crime, but you are allowed to ransom your own life. You're allowed to pay some sort of price as recompense for what you have actually done. That option's not available when it's premeditated murder, but in something like this, it is an option. But these cities of refuge, it's not no man's land. It's not a zone of anarchy where we don't care about laws and rules. Precisely the opposite. This is an area where they're very concerned about justice. It's supposed to be the impartial third party, not involved in this dispute, not involved in all of the emotional turmoil of somebody who has died. And to have the priests, have judges who are able to say, let's look at the facts of what happened and let's decide. Was this premeditated? Was this murder? Or was it an accident? Was it manslaughter? And so a different price needs to be paid. What are your thoughts on that so far? I know we talked about it some last week too. Mark.
Yeah, the only thing I really found interesting, other than what you said, was that there are only 5 noted cities of refuge in this text. One of the cities that's mentioned is a city of refuge, but it's not stated in this text. And I think that's Beezer.
I think it's in the text. So.
Let's see.
Verse 8.
Yeah, verse 8. These are in the wilderness on the plain from a tribe of Judah.
Yeah, verse 36. All of the other cities were called out as cities of refuge. But in verse 36, Beezer is not called out as a city of refuge.
Which chapter are you in?
What's that?
Which chapter are you in?
21.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so 21 going into the Levitical cities, which these are Levitical cities as well. That's not mentioned there, I guess, which I didn't
Yeah, I
catch.
just found that interesting. It was just weird. It's an anomaly. Something.
Yeah. The city of Beezer is there, but I guess it is not necessarily identified specifically as a city of refuge. In chapter 20, it is identified there in verse 8. It's listed among the 6 cities that are chosen. Sometimes on these lists of cities, they're not 100% complete for various reasons. And we don't always know why that is, but sometimes there's a particular point that is being made. Sorry, let me get myself back over to that. 36. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So yeah. Okay. Go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just going to say I thought Hebron was interesting because Hebron belonged to Caleb.
Yeah.
It was also a city of refuge, and it also was a Levitical city.
Right.
So it was a pretty busy place.
It was, yes. It was important for that reason. But again, it was one of those places that a lot of the people thought would never be able to be captured. Caleb was able to capture it, of course, with his faith in God, and it takes a pretty prominent role in the city, in the nation of Israel. So when the manslayer has gotten to the city of refuge and it has been judged that he is a manslayer and not a murderer, how long does he stay there in the city of refuge?
Till the high priest of that time dies.
Till the high priest of that time dies. Mark?
In which case, I guess if it happens that way, you hope the guy's really, really old.
Yeah.
As young, and would be here forever.
That's true. Though maybe you want a few years to go by so the family still calms down, yeah, so what's up with that? Like, what does the high priest have to do with any of this?
Just a question.
Yeah.
Did they legislate the law as well? Would they kind of in control of legal matters?
Yes, to varying degrees throughout Israel's history, as that kind of gets passed around to some different groups. But yes, he has a lot of control over these legal matters at really all points. Yeah.
Does it have something to do with our high priest?
I think it does. That this is a foreshadowing of what Jesus does for us. Now, when the high priest dies, and now the manslayer is allowed to leave the city of refuge and to lawfully go anywhere, has the high priest really done anything specifically for that manslayer? Is there anything about his death that actually actively creates some sort of penance or some sort of atonement? It's a thin connection, right? The high priest may not have ever been involved in that person's case. Because remember, the high priest is not in all of these cities of refuge. He may not even be in any of those cities of refuge. He may never have heard of the case, may never have been involved in any way. May have spent his entire life doing other things, yet when he dies, now it has set this person free. I think this is basically a short way of creating a length of time where that person has to remain within the city of refuge as kind of a rule of thumb that's easy to determine. You don't have to establish a set number of years. You tie it to the high priest dying. But then that serves as an element of mercy in that, hey, the manslayer gets to live, but also some level of consequence, and you don't get to just run back home and act like everything is normal, because it's not. You did take a life, and your life is going to forever change as a result. You're going to have to spend some number of years in this city of refuge. You don't know how long that will be, but you have enjoyed the mercy of being able to live. And then most importantly, the connection to how our high priest dies for us, how that atones for our sins. This is something that has a much stronger connection. The death of our high priest, Jesus, literally and directly atones for our sins. It's not this thin connection that they had there. It's a very much cause and effect relationship, that Jesus died so our sins can be forgiven. That's looking forward to that, and in a way that they may or may not fully understand at that point. Yeah, John.
Do you know if this stuff still goes on right now, or is it kind of like back on?
I don't know if they maintain that in Israel today. Judaism has changed a lot over the years, and in fact, even saying Judaism is in some ways a misnomer, because there's a lot of different kinds of Judaism now. It has splintered into 1,000,001 different factions with different approaches to the law, to tradition. I don't know, I'm not sure exactly if they still do that today or not. Okay?
Well, they cannot know whether they're of the priestly lineage or not. They don't know their
Yeah.
lineage at all, because that's all been destroyed. So,
That's true. These tribal affiliations have faded. They don't know that anymore. That's a good point.
I
So,
guess they have rabbis, is what they have now, but.
yeah. But that would undermine that attempt to
Can't
continue
have a
this.
high priest or anything, because they don't know what the lineage is now.
Not to mention the fact that modern day Israel does not control this land anymore. So if they do anything with cities of refuge, it won't be with those because they don't necessarily control that area. Kathy.
Because you might have to run from your land into another land, into another territory, to the city of refuge. I was trying to find anywhere if the cities were chosen in any type of pattern, or if they were just chosen because of the distance, the fairness of, so that they would be spread out evenly.
I think it is much more just being spread out evenly. They're not necessarily near the tribal borders or anything like that to facilitate that being easier. They're just spread out, north, central, and south, and then east and west, each side of the Jordan, to make sure that there's opportunity for everyone if the situation arises. It's not 100% perfect. You see, these are a little closer here. And then if you're in some of these areas, deep in the desert of Judah, you might have a little bit of a longer way to go. If you find yourself far away, that could be a bit of a problem, but there are opportunities available. Mark.
It's interesting in Numbers when it's talked about, when this is talked about, the directive is to the assembly to protect that person.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't just, okay, you're okay over here. It's, if you're a citizen within one of those towns, you're there to help protect that person. I just find that it's a very community kind of thing, and it's charged to everybody.
Yeah.
That's the way I read it anyway.
That is important to show that. And you might ask, well, why are we protecting someone who's killed somebody else? Well, why does why at a courtroom do they protect the defendant? So he has his day in court, so justice can be meted out. Like you can't just walk into a courtroom and shoot the defendant because you don't like what he may or may not have done. Like you need to wait and see the outcome of the case. And so, yeah, we're protecting somebody who's accused of something very terrible in this case, but that is important for justice to happen. God's trying to remove some of the emotion and some of the hotness of how we feel about this, because it is very serious for somebody to have died, but we need to be careful about this becoming, as a crazy, bloodthirsty sort of excess. Mark.
I just kind of, you have to put yourself in that position if you were the murderer,
Mm-hmm.
returning home. It's not like the people who were looking to kill you are all of a sudden okay.
Right.
Okay, come on, your name, you're typically going to be your neighbor if it was an accident.
Yeah.
And so God provides this cooling, you talk about the hotness of the moment, and God affords this time of cooling off. I don't know, knowing humans as we are, that vengeance leaves a person. Hopefully that's what was happening. I'm sure that's what God was looking for.
Yeah.
It couldn't be easy for anybody to have, because that's where you got to go home. There's nowhere else to go. That was the land that you were given.
Yeah.
You kind of had to go back to that situation.
Right. And that's people are the same today, right? The very same thing would happen if somebody killed somebody in your family, and then they move back in next door to you, and you go, "Excuse me, are we just going to allow this?" But, if justice has been meted out, if they've borne the penalty of that crime, then yeah, we are just going to allow this. That's not easy, but that's the way it's supposed to be. Okay?
This also applied to the stranger and sojourner, which I thought was interesting.
Yes. That is a legal protection that is extended to people who are not necessarily citizens of Israel. They're passing through, or they're kind of the residents there. Yet it's still important for this mercy and justice to be extended to them as well. So just because somebody is a stranger does not mean that no rules apply. Dave?
Well, first, we can't equate this judgment for the congregation with our judgment system today. It's not the same thing. And that they didn't use God as today. They don't use God.
Sure.
So what I see is they had to go before the congregation as well, and they had to be, the facts had to be investigated. And we don't know the time frame of it, but however, in addition to the death of the priest, they had to investigate and say, okay, this guy's guilty or he's not guilty. If he's not guilty, he gets to stay here until the priest dies. When the priest dies, he can go back to a city and nobody can touch him, right?
Right.
And the whole point of that is for someone to take vengeance after that. Now, you're not going against the Levite priest or the congregation in that city. You're going against God.
Right.
God's the one who established this.
Right.
So that's the driving thing that I see.
Yeah.
And, it's not, no, you don't have to like it.
Right.
You don't. If he moves next door to you, you don't have to like it.
Right.
But you have to obey it.
Yeah.
And there's a huge difference there.
Well, and the thing with a lot of these ideas of justice, right, is like none of it brings the person back. If it's an accident and they've paid the price and they've been in that city of refuge until the high priest dies, still doesn't bring that victim back from the dead. If it's judged to be murder and they're put to death for what they did, it still doesn't bring that loved one back. It's the very same thing today. Justice is there to pay that price to make it right, but there are still consequences for sinful actions. And so that's one good reason to stay away from sin in the first place. Betty?
Well, I was kind of interested in verse 4. It says, this person will declare his case in the hearing of the elders of that city. And down in 6 it says, until he stands before the congregation for judgment. It sounds like the elders heard the case and brought it before the congregation. It wasn't just them. Am I thinking of that correctly?
These would be public proceedings, right? The elders are the ones in charge of the proceedings, the one making the judgment, but this is a public display of justice, just like we have today. Our legal proceedings are public occasions, and it's there presented to our community, presented to our society as this is what we're going to do with a person who has committed this crime, or we're going to do a due diligence and show that he did not commit this crime, whatever the case may be. But it's a way of showing the public these are the facts and these are the consequences, and a way for the elders to actually make that discernment and make that judgment as the impartial third party.
Actually make the decision, not the congregation.
It's the elders who are making the decision there, but it's presented to the congregation at large. Okay, chapter 21 is the yes.
I want to comment on that.
Yeah.
That's not entirely true, but it's mostly true about the congregation. The whole point that if you look how God established this kind of fact-finding things, one person can walk up and say, yeah, I saw him, friends of the family, I saw him kill him on purpose.
Yeah.
Well, that didn't work that way. There had to be more than one person. You dig back in, there had to be witnesses. There had to be facts there. So, to me, the benefit of having, however large and who's involved in it as a congregation,
Yeah.
that would help establish an environment where those kinds of the benefit is, I can see the wisdom in that from God doing that, rather than just have the priest just go, you know.
Absolutely, yeah. They're not making this judgment off of just kind of how it sounds to them or what they feel like, or I don't like the look of that guy, he's kind of ugly, so we're gonna, nothing like that, kind of like we do today. And it's not a perfect comparison because they've got a God-given justice system there, and we do not, but it is still a justice system. And the priests, the elders, are going to make this judgment, make this decision off of evidence, witnesses. You're right. It has already been said in the law that you can't put somebody to death off of hearsay, off of a testimony of one witness, because again, it's a really serious thing to put somebody to death. You've got to have 2 or 3 witnesses. You need to have overwhelming information and evidence that shows, yes, this person is guilty and deserves to be put to death. Now, if that cannot be established, then, well, that's what you have to grapple with in any justice system. What do you do when there is not enough evidence, but you still think he might have done it? You kind of need to be able to prove that he did it. Yeah, that's a good point. So chapter 21, the Levitical cities are given. Remember that the Levites were not given a single block of land like we see on this map of the 12 tribes. Judah's got land here. Simeon's a weird special case. Reuben's got land over here. Ephraim's got land there. Levi's not on that map. Levi doesn't have a block of land like these others do. Instead, they are to be dispersed throughout the nation. Yet they are still given cities and some areas within these tribal boundaries. There were 48 cities in total. That number was established by God. That includes the 6 cities of refuge, as we mentioned. And this is the Levites' right to possess. This is lawfully and rightfully theirs. God had commanded it through Moses back in Numbers 35 and in Deuteronomy 19. It was clear that they were supposed to have this. And that's why they come to Joshua and say, now that the land has been divided amongst all the tribes, we want our cities. Give us what is ours. And they're right for asking that. Remember that not every Levite was a priest. There's the tribe of Levi, and then some of those people within the tribe are priests. So you do need something else for the other people to do that are within this tribe. And these cities give opportunity for them to have land, for them to have jobs to do in something that is theirs. And then the priests are also, they have, property within this as well. Notice that they're given these cities, and then the priests are also supported by tithes from the people. So it's not even dumped all on the Levites, that the Levites are supposed to support the priests among them. That responsibility is dispersed to every tribe, that as the priests are among them, they should be supported, not just with whatever they're earning from their Levitical cities. So chapter 21 is mostly a long list of these cities and where they are. You can read through that and kind of see where they are, map them out if that's something that's interesting to you. But mostly what we can get from this is just that they are evenly distributed across the land. This was something that was promised and was something that the Levites were lawfully to have because that was given by God. Mark.
Yeah, it's interesting that they also list the town and the pasture lands.
Yeah.
And the circumference probably of that town, which in order to raise an animal, it takes a lot of land. So there was quite a bit of land in there, other than just the town.
Yeah.
They had to have it in order to raise these animals so they could live, because they weren't going to be able to live just to sacrifice.
Right.
That was their portion. So it's, maybe they had to help people who couldn't bring their own animal. I don't know if that was the case, but in some cases that they probably did have to do some of that. But there is quite, I would imagine there is quite a bit of property when you consider all the acreage that it would take to support all these people,
Yeah.
houses.
Yeah, and 48 cities is not a small number either. So, 48 cities with the land, the pasture land around them. Yeah, that's a pretty substantial portion given to the Levites. For a tribe that does not have an inheritance, they have a pretty reasonable inheritance. It just looks different than what the others do. It's kind of a different role that they play. Yeah.
Because they represent God.
Right.
It's putting God throughout the land.
Yes.
In that sense.
Yes, and that was very important to accomplish for the spiritual health of the nation. John.
Just trying to understand, is Canaan was like the main hub where Joshua's making like every decision?
Say that again.
Is Canaan like the main area where Joshua's like making every decision?
Canaan is this whole land, this whole area. And it is also a group of people, the Canaanites. Not all the people who are in Canaan are Canaanites, which is mildly confusing. But so Canaan is this area. Joshua is within it, of course, like they all are at this point, now that they have conquered vast stretches of it. And then Joshua is allotting this land as the people are coming to him. And like we talked about last week, they're casting lots to let God make the decision for exactly where these boundaries are and exactly which tribe should go where. Okay.
Were the priests all descendants of Aaron?
Yes. Yes.
I thought they were, but I couldn't find it.
Yes. Okay, so the question. I've had a few people ask me this question, and it's question 5 and 6 in here. Joshua 21:43 through 45 is a little problematic. We're not totally sure how to deal with that because it says, "Thus the Lord gave to Israel all the land that he swore to give to their fathers, and they took possession of it, and they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their fathers. Not one of all their enemies had withstood them, for the Lord had given all their enemies into their hands. Not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass." Does this purple border look like all the land to you? Doesn't look like all the land to me. What do we need to understand about this? What does this mean? Gary.
I think maybe part of it is what God had promised, what he gave them, and what they refused to take.
Yeah. Right. The purple boundary here that they actually conquer is what God gave them. But God gave them this other section too. They just didn't go take it. That was, within their hand to go and to grasp. God has delivered on his promise, but that's not, they don't actually go and seize it. So when you then go to, and this is question 6, we kind of answer these together, in Hebrews chapter 4, verses 6 through 10. Hebrews 4, 6 through 10 says, "Since therefore it remains for some to enter it, and those who formerly received the good news failed to enter because of their disobedience, again he appoints a certain day, today, saying through David so long afterward, in the words already quoted, 'Today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts.' For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken of another day later on. So then there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God, for whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his." So we read that God delivered on his promises and gave the people rest. And then here we read that Joshua did not give the people rest. So which is it? Kathy?
I can answer one section of that. And
Okay.
that is, God did give the people rest in the land because they took all the land. So they had rest because the other nations around them were not able to fight against them because God protected them. So in that sense, they had rest.
Yeah, so there's a sense in which, okay, they've got general control of the land. They are the undisputed like rulers of this area. So yes, they have rest in that way. But they've not gone and actually finished the job. Okay?
Well, I took the rest that they got was a physical thing. And the rest that was promised is a spiritual thing.
Yes, Hebrews is certainly making the spiritual point out of that, but there is a sense, still a problem within Joshua that we have to grapple with on God fulfilled his promises and gave them all the land, yet they do not have all the land. And Joshua is spending a lot of time telling them, go get all the land. So do they have it all or not?
Eventually.
But eventually they get close, but not quite. They never get this area of Philistia. They never get this area of Phoenicia. They come close, but not quite. And that's only a relatively narrow slice of history, too. So do they get all the land or not?
What about Solomon?
Yeah, that's what this is here. This border is Solomon's, that they get really far, but Solomon still is not able to control all of it. Aaron?
In Judges chapter 2, it's pretty clear what God told them to do. And it was to make no covenant with the people of the land and to break down their altars. And
Right.
Those two things were not found. And as a result of that, God said, I'm not going to drive out all the people so that they will be a test for Israel.
So some of this has changed because of Israel's disobedience, that they have not actually gone and taken all this for themselves. So has God gone back on his promise? Is God not fulfilling his promise to them? Mark?
When you talk about disobedience, that's the manifestation of their faith. And I think this is what the Hebrew writer, this is the way I looked at it anyway. Chapter 4 is predicated by the people who fell in the wilderness because of their lack of faith. They didn't receive that rest. They ended up dying in the desert because of their lack of faith. Hebrews addresses the foundation of which, the thing that Jesus was trying to bring to people, which is believe in God. You need to trust in God. If you're not doing that, nothing else even matters. And this is why some of the people, not all of the people, but some of the people during that day, and this happens throughout all of history, some people believe in God, but there's a large portion of people that do not. They will not enter God's rest, no matter what happens.
Sure.
They don't believe enough in God to go and take the land, so they will not enter that rest. But God did his part. And it's the same thing that we find in the Christ. God has done his part. Now it's up to us to do our part.
And that's the application I wanted to make here. Like, maybe this helps us understand. Has God brought salvation to the world?
Yes.
Yes. Does all the world have salvation from God? There's a difference. God brought Israel to the land. He gave them all of the promised land. They didn't go and actually finish getting all of it. Is that God's fault? Is that God's problem? That's just as silly as if dinner is cooked and made and put on the table and you never go sit down to eat. And you say, well, I didn't get dinner. I'm so hungry. Well, sit down and eat. If you want it, go get it. Don't complain about not getting all the land because you didn't go get it. Dave?
I have a question.
Yeah.
How did Joshua give them rest? It was up to God, not Joshua.
Sure. But, yeah.
But because of their disobedience, God is the one who said, I'm not give them rest.
Right.
So I think it's a trick question for me.
Yeah, in some ways, for sure it is. But I still, yeah, Ida, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
He did give them rest. They weren't wandering around Kadesh Barnea anymore.
Right.
So
And-
it doesn't matter whether they sinned or anything like that. God gave them rest.
Right.
We can't wiggle out of that.
This is the tension of Joshua that we're getting. It's like they have rest, but they still have responsibility to go finish the job that they never really do, and so they always have that tension there. They have the land, but they don't have all the land. God kept his promises, but they didn't go actually get all of what God was giving to them. This is the tension of Joshua. That's why I wanted us to explore this and to know why why there's this kind of misunderstanding we have.
Well, clearly states in Hebrews, verse 6, that they went against God.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to go back to what I said before. Sure, there was rest given in certain instances from Joshua, but not this kind of thing. We
Yeah.
deal with conflict with what God said.
Right.
God said, you may be angry, you're not going into my rest.
Yeah.
Okay, because you went against my will. And that right there is in the conversation for me, because no matter what Joshua wanted, couldn't go over that, couldn't supersede that.
Right. Yeah. This whole thing is that they've not gotten the fullness of their reward because they've not had fullness of faith. Thanks, everybody. If you have more questions about that, save them for next week, please. Otherwise, we will go on to chapter 22. The next lesson is that chapter by itself.